Welcome to the Sencast. My name is Dale Pickles, Managing Director of B Squared and the host of the Sencast. We created the Sencast as a way of trying to make schools more inclusive, to help teachers be teachers of SEND, and to help support staff have better understanding. The Sencast is also a great way to get the same consistent message to schools and parents. My guests this week are Clare Ward and Dr. Jamie Galpin. Clare has worked in the world of SEND for the last 30 years in a variety of roles. And Jamie is a chartered developmental psychologist with a long career in SEND. In today's episode, we talked about universal approaches to support in education. The Sencast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. And as well as this podcast, we also have our Sencast sessions, our online CPD. If you haven't accessed a Sencast session, these are video CPD sessions, often with the same great guests as the podcast. We run 9 live sessions and 2 free SEND briefings every year. The sessions are £10 per school and you can watch live on the day, or you can watch them whenever you want after that date. We have over 150 sessions you can purchase and use for CPD across the whole school. For even better value, you can now subscribe for £175 a year and have access to all of the sessions that are available. Now, let's get on with the podcast. In this week's show, we're discussing universal approaches to support in education. My guests this week are Clare Ward and Dr. Jamie Galpin. Clare has worked in the world of SEN for the last 30 years in a variety of roles, including TA, speech and language therapist, social worker, and NHS manager. And Clare currently specialises in working with young people with social communication difficulties, some of whom who have a diagnosis of autism. Jamie is a chartered developmental psychologist, also has had a long career in SEN, and he's a master's in child development, a PhD in developmental psychology. And Clare and Jamie met when they both worked for the same multidisciplinary outreach support service team in inner London. And between Jamie and Clare, they are amazing at sharing what research looks like in practice. So they'll give me all the posh, long-worded bit and then explain it in English for me, which is very much appreciated. Welcome back to the show, Clare and Jamie.
Hello. Lovely to be back.
You are welcome. Now, in the information you sent me around recording this, you mentioned this mythical normal child, and you use that mythical normal child in quotes. And this is the child that schools generally are aiming everything at. And if you don't fit that mold, then school doesn't seem to work for you, and it goes downhill from there. So how can schools change from only working for this normal child to working for all children and young people?
So I think one of the sort of first things is just interrogating a little bit that idea of a normal student, of just taking a step back and saying, who have we designed this lesson for? Who have we designed this setting for? Who have we built it for? And just having the time to kind of reflect on that and start to also then consider who cannot access what we've got. So who couldn't access this space or that space. So the starting point really is just that sort of questioning of who have we designed this space for? And is it for the children, young people that we currently have? Or is it for the children, young people we thought we'd have, or we wish we had, or some kind of expectation of, children like this, or children like I was when I was younger? It's thinking, okay, who have we designed this space for?
Or is it even still that 20th century Victorian style child with the subjects and the timing and all the changes, very white, middle upper class, all these things? Are we still aiming at them without even realizing it?
I think so. 100%. I think that's what our education system is built for, and I think we just haven't had the time to stop and consider that, nor have educators been given or allowed to adapt and change to create a more relevant and authentic education for the children, young people that they've got. I think there's a kind of an associated kind of deprofessionalization of educators and practitioners that doesn't give enough agency to education professionals to adapt and change things to better suit the children in their context. And it's that recognition of that real kind of variation or inherent variability across all children that are going to be being taught. They're not all going to be the same. And so that's the kind of first starting point, I suppose. And it's that acceptance of the inherent variability or essentially neurodiversity acceptance. That's that point of moving beyond awareness. If we truly get to acceptance, then it means we're designing for variability. We're not waiting for specific categories to become relevant in my context. I'm not waiting for an autistic child to enter my classroom. I'm not waiting for a dyslexic child to enter my classroom because I accept neurodivergence. I accept the fact that we all see the world differently. And therefore, we're planning that variability from the get go rather than a starting point of people are going to think like this, and therefore this is the most effective way to deliver this. It's more thinking actually there's going to be a huge variability. Again, regardless of any specific diagnoses that children in my class might have, any specific kind of neurotypes that children might identify with or have been identified with, it's there is going to be variability because that's what being a human is, and I therefore need to kind of start planning for that. So it really goes back to attitudes and beliefs, really, in terms of that kind of foundational understanding of that inherent variability. And once we accept that, then, it's obviously intuitive that we need to plan for that variability, creates more kind of flexible learning environments and for our children and people.
It's interesting you said there about waiting for that autistic child. Is in reality, there's already one in your classroom. They may or may not have a diagnosis, and there may be other neurodiversities and things like that going on. They're already there. You don't wait for someone to tell you, oh, you have an autistic child now, you need to change. Is actually there are there already, undiagnosed, not even knowing it or anything, or maybe like my daughter has a diagnosis, doesn't want the school to know because she doesn't want to be seen as different.
No, and it's exactly that point that you get to that extent where a normal child includes autistic kids, dyslexic kids, kids with ADHD. That is just part of our concept of a child. And therefore, we're not waiting to, and that again goes back to that acceptance piece. If we genuinely, autism acceptance, neurodiversity acceptance, if genuine acceptance would be not then having to have a child come in and prove they have some sort of need before we look to accommodate it. We kind of recognize there is this variability. I'm going to plan for it. I'm going to put support in place regardless, because that support I put in place might be vital for one or two kids, but it's going to be valuable for everybody. It's also going to foster a greater sense of belonging because when I walk into that space, it already feels like it was designed for me rather than support is retrofitted around me once I enter that space. Because what that implicitly reaffirms to me is that when somebody designed this space, their concept of child or human didn't include me. I was an afterthought. They designed it, their concept of human or student didn't extend to include who I am. Whereas if we're preempting that variability and designing for it, I can walk into a space and there's already kind of, adaptations or kind of flexible options in that space. So immediately there's a sense of belonging that, yeah, this is a space that feels like it was designed for me rather than, as I said, that sort of retrofitted differentiation or kind of reactive adaptation that we're putting in place rather than that proactive, preemptive expectation that I will have autistic children in my classroom because I've got a classroom of humans. And that is part of the variability of being a human.
And I think the fact that there are children and young people who are either disagreeing with their diagnoses, I have a few of them on my caseload, or who don't want that diagnosis shared, means they are well and truly picking up on that feeling that there is such thing as a normal person in my classroom and I'm not that person. So it's teachers perhaps teaching to it, and also children and young people being aware of this expectation, which of course is completely false.
It doesn't help when at a secondary school, when they do the autism awareness or neurodiversity awareness, they find kind of the polar extremes of what this looks like, and tells you that every autistic person will be wearing ear defenders because they cannot cope. So if you see someone with ear defenders, they are autistic. And my daughter's friends look at her going, "Do you have ear defenders?" She's like, "No." And that message again, this is what it is. This is almost like, and almost highlighting they are different. And my daughter comes back every time they do it, and she hates it. It is just, she rants about it when she gets home. Like, do you want to do anything about it? She's like, no, it doesn't matter. They're never going to listen. What's the point? And also, she doesn't want them to know because she doesn't want to be seen in that way or treated differently. As you said, Claire, she doesn't want to walk into a classroom where for where she's going to sit, there's different things. And everyone going, well, why have you got that? She wants to walk into a classroom which is, there is flex. And that's the thing. I think people don't understand what it looks like. And the answer is flexible and some choices.
Absolutely, you're speaking our language.
Yeah, and I think that point around difference, as you say, if there are kind of awareness campaigns and things like that, inevitably the biggest emphasis is on difference, the extent to which an autistic person is different from a non-autistic person. A dyslexic person is different from a non-dyslexic person. And we've potentially gone too far into that focus on difference that we've lost sight of the kind of unifying elements as well. So we talk a lot about, and a lot of our work is built on these kind of dual concepts and dual constructs of unity and diversity. And they sort of start off by feeling like they're kind of in opposition with one another. But I borrow a quote from somebody called Edgar Morin, who talks about understanding what's human means recognizing our unity and our diversity. So not letting the fact that we recognize diversity efface or erase the idea of our unity, but also not letting that kind of unity also erase the idea of diversity. So holding both those things together and recognizing what being a human means, that unity and diversity, that we're all the same because we're all different. And so we want that reflected then in our classrooms, that we can walk into a classroom and we can look and children are accessing their learning in lots of different ways. It's not just Jamie with his special A3 handout with lots of extra pictures on it in the corner and everyone else is doing it another way, albeit maybe struggling to do it that way, or making it look like I'm doing okay doing it this way, but actually I would do much better if you adapted it or gave me a different option to try it some other way. But instead, I walk into the classroom and I look up and I can see everybody accessing the work in slightly different ways, having picked a different choice or different option. And that's a much better reflection of the reality of humans and that inherent variability, rather than this sense that everybody should be doing it the same way. That all our classrooms, we should be able to look in each one and it should look exactly the same. It shouldn't. You've got different children in each classroom learning a different thing, and there's different interrelationships and it's different times of day. There are all these kind of variables that mean that you should have each classroom looking slightly different. There should be that diversity in terms of our classroom, and what's underpinning that, the unity across all of that would be that we recognize that variability. That's a kind of foundational principle that we kind of hold in our setting. That therefore is why we have flexibility, why we have variability in the way we design our learning environment.
And additionally, you touched on that child who has that support, and then those children who are struggling to do it the other way. And the assumption is they are kind of, that's their ability. And it's like, maybe not. Perhaps that's ability in the way they have to provide that information to you in that format, or that's their ability based on them accessing the information in that way, not their actual ability. It's their ability based on your limitations on what is provided.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then I think because of that, you often don't get a valid or fair reflection of what somebody is capable of or what somebody can do, because it's essentially you've kind of said, let's see how fast you can run, but I'll tie your legs together, and then you go, okay, that's as fast as you can go, great, rather than actually, let's give you other options of doing this or other ways of kind of doing this, and it turns out that actually you've got much greater capacity or ability than we kind of thought. And but I never had the opportunity, I never had the chance. That's one of the kind of benefits of this kind of universal focus, as I said, is integrating support that would usually be given in isolation to one child into general teaching to make it available to everybody can help to highlight that point, Dale, that actually there's other kids who are going to find this really valuable. And actually, it might unlock something for them or might enable them to engage and enjoy the lesson a lot more than they were before, as well as being really crucial for this child or this child to be able to engage in the lesson that I'm delivering.
I think often when you are doing that work for everyone, and then those adaptations for that child who is the only child who apparently needs it, you're then doing that as an additional piece of work, which then adds in, whether you like it or not, on a subconscious level, there's probably that slight resentment that you've got to do with all this extra work and it's just for one child. Does it really matter? Do I really need to? You kind of get that sort of thing in your head, which then when a second child, you're like, oh, another one. Whereas actually, if you change that whole practice to how can I tweak my first way of doing it to include them and anyone else, so I only have to do things once. That's what you're really asking for, isn't it?
Absolutely. I was talking to some teachers on Tuesday who are still kind of getting used to a new cohort. And it's resentment, such anxiety about how am I going to meet all the needs of these very, very different students and in a GCSE year. And with the default is I need extra help. I need a TA in that class because of the needs of whatever. And of course, it's hard to get out of that system. I think people struggle with changing. It brings a load of uncertainty, obviously, but changing that model. But I think it's gaining traction. Jamie will talk more about it. But there are loads of other countries who use this very universal design approach, and it's just inspiring and challenging. I think as a teacher, looking at some of the ways in which they work, it doesn't look like a classroom that you'd see in an average UK school. It's very open, it's very free, and it's helping people become experts in the way they learn rather than taking everything from the teacher who decides how that's going to happen. And that's such a fundamental pivot that it's very exciting and it's fairly challenging.
And I think there's a few different frameworks that can kind of help us look at these kind of universal approaches, but one thing that's consistent is the word design. So whether it's inclusive design, inclusion by design, universal design, there's that design element. It's that recognition that what we're doing is we're creating an environment where learning can happen. We're not forcing knowledge into these, that idea of an empty vessel that we're pouring the content into. We're kind of recognizing there's an inherent curiosity in kids, and we're just setting up an environment to allow that to kind of come out with designing a space that allows children and young people to engage with the learning in ways that resonate particularly well for them. And it's about options. It's about having that different options for children and young people to process information, to show what they know, and to engage with the lesson. But as Claire says, it does bring some uncertainty because you end up inevitably giving away a little bit of control. It's because if I allow children to make a choice, I'm opening up the opportunity for them to make the wrong choice. I might be sitting here going, no, no, don't choose that, don't choose that. It's not going to help you out. And we have to be prepared for the fact that this child may choose to engage with the lesson in a way that might work best for them. So I've got a short-term hit that their book is not going to look completed compared to somebody else's book. But I've got that longer-term aim, Claire says, of trying to support them to understand themselves as a learner, give them that agency of how I learn best, what are my strengths, what are my needs, so I can better advocate for those needs and better kind of utilize those strengths that I have to sort of help me out. But it does mean that every now and again, the sort of micro level aim of what we're trying to do in a lesson might not be met, but the kind of macro level, what we're trying to do in education, which is to create children, young people that have a strong sense of agency and a strong understanding of themselves as learners and how they learn best and what they enjoy best, then we need to be prepared to take that risk. And risk is fundamental to teaching. It's rooted in kind of fallibility and risk. We might get it wrong. We might design a lesson and it looks great on paper. And then you get kids involved and suddenly it all goes down the toilet. Even from my perspective as a researcher, I can design a really great study. And as soon as I get the kids involved, they ruin everything. They're not going to do exactly what I planned. It's not going to go how I planned. But then you kind of adapt. And that's the point about the design. My design, yeah, it was good. I had a good rationale for the design, but maybe it didn't work out. And that's okay because there was a logic to why I designed it that way. And there is always a chance it's not going to kind of pay off. But then I look at that design. I don't go, oh, the reason this lesson didn't go well was because of the people in the lesson. Oh, this lesson would have been great if it wasn't for the kids. Or that one child over there, they were the reason it went badly. I shine a light back on the environment over which I have control. And I think one of the kind of issues we've got back to that point around unity and diversity is because we don't have that acceptance of that variability, because we tend to look at this kind of normal way of learning, then when a child isn't learning in a class, our default is because there's something wrong with the child. It's their failure as opposed to actually, could there be something in the environment that I've created here that is a barrier for this child? And we talk about it in terms of, if you think about sort of product design, if I create a product and, I take it to market and nobody buys it, I don't sit there and say, well, everybody's stupid. I'm going to keep manufacturing my product, keep trying to sell my product. It's not going to work. I instead go, okay, that didn't work. That didn't land with my market. I'm going to need to do some more market research, better understand my target audience and what they want and what's relevant and great for them. But in education, we create our product, we design our lesson. If a child doesn't buy my lesson, I do what I just said. I kind of sit there and say, well, there's something wrong with the child or young person.
I also think that in that thing there is like, if I'm going to create a product, am I going to create it and then keep selling it? Whereas almost like we have a product in education, we've been doing it for 200 years. Let's just keep doing it. And I think there's that sort of thing, is that fear of creating something new, as opposed to this a tried and tested thing that has worked for however long.
I'm going to say that in a way, as educators, we need to act more like someone in marketing. We've got competition for the attention of the children and young people that we have in our classrooms. And the world in school and the world outside of school are so very different. There's so much compliance in school, and there's so much freedom out of school, and there's so many screens out of school. And I think a lot of, I'm not completely anti-screens, but I just think amount of agency that people have, young children and young people have outside of school, where they're engaged in so much screen action, where they totally control what happens, whether it's gaming or social media. You don't like a you swipe it in full, control of yourself in a game. And I think there's a lot of children and young people who really struggle with the level of compliance that's been demanded of them, and gives them all kinds of kind of all the types of uncertainty that you can manage. And I think we have to acknowledge that and work with it. And I think what's so nice about a lot of the universal stuff is that it is quite tech heavy and uses and embraces tech in ways that make things more flexible and more engaging. Engagement is a major part, certainly, of the universal design for learning. And I think, we have to, instead of hoping that it's all going to go away and that we can go back to a 1920s classroom, move on and embrace it somehow.
It's interesting, Jamie. You mentioned like you've identified that maybe a learner hasn't learned something. And I've got a question of how do you identify a learner hasn't learned something? And generally, it's kind of the way you've set up your assessment, which generally means it has to be written or it has to be done a certain way. And if the child isn't demonstrating it in that way, then you can't evidence that they've learned it. And if you go through my school reports, there was loads and loads repeated again and again, all the way through of Dale shares some great ideas, but doesn't get them down on paper again and again. I knew the answer verbally. It wasn't shown in my writing. Part of my head was, well, you've told me I was correct, so why do I need to write it down? There's a whole thing in my head of, it's like showing workings and things like that. And I get it now, but I also, now I'm going, but we do have more options. We can use tech. Back in the 90s, we didn't have the tech. And yes, you had to do it that way. But now we have options. Now, as you said, Claire, what's going on outside of school, the way things are happening, the options they have, and they have to conform. But I can't even give you a real reason of why they have to conform apart from because I said so.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, the first thing, yes, we've got the technology that is a key fact. Part of that is it's inherently more flexible. There's more opportunities there. If I have a digital version of something, I can enlarge the text. I can change the background color. I can do text to speech. I can do speech to text. But there's a second issue, and it's, again, to sort of Claire's point, it's around relevance, value, and authenticity for a child or young person. For a lot of kids, walking into school is stepping into a time machine. As much as we might have this romanticized sort of pining for writing things down, and that's really important. For most children, young people, they'll never use a pen outside of school, like for their whole life. And particularly for kids that are in primary school now, there's very little chance that they will use a pen for writing. Might be using it for kind of drawing, those sorts of things. So actually, the use of tech there is a way to potentially bring some relevance, value, and authenticity to what we're doing if we can't manage that in the topic. So in the curriculum, in terms of things that we're being asked to teach kids, it might be, okay, I have to teach them about the Victorians. I can't, and it's hard for a child sitting here today who's got a constant TikTok stream saying that the world's about to end because of the climate crisis. There's a huge cost of living crisis. You're not going to have a job. You're not going to be able to afford a home. You're not even going to afford to fuel yourself. Oh, by the way, sit down and pay attention to this really important information about the Industrial Revolution. You're thinking, actually, what, this is not relevant or authentic or to me currently. How is this going to help me in terms of the world's about to end? Why am I sat here doing this? So you can maybe bring some of the relevance in that use of technology. So, okay, maybe I don't see the Industrial Revolution as being relevant to my life, but actually, if you're asking me to show you what I know through the medium of creating my own 30-second TikTok style video, then at least there's some relevance for me. I can then, engage because this seems meaningful to me. Whereas if I've got a dual irrelevance, so both the form and content seem completely irrelevant to me, it's going to be really, really hard for me to engage with what you're asking me to engage with there. So the technology allows that, but equally, in terms of that flexibility, we don't necessarily need the technology. There can be sort of low tech alternative ways, particularly around that action and expression, showing what I know. And the way that you can free up some flexibility there is really just having real clarity over what is the learning objective. So to your point there, Dale, about how do I know if somebody hasn't engaged in something? Well, part of it is we've got a really clear destination of where we're all trying to get to in this lesson. And I make that really clear to the students so they can see this is where we're heading. We're going to this location. So straight away now, it opens up opportunities of different ways to get there. If I say, okay, I know we're going to London. Okay, I could fly there. I could drive there. I could, walk there. I can get a ferry there. Because we've got that confidence in where we're going, it immediately means, okay, and so in a lesson, I can maybe follow some child led tangents because I know I'm not going to get lost because I know my destination. I know where I'm trying to get to. And I think to the sort of point you made, we can sometimes conflate our learning objective with the way in which you demonstrate your acquisition of that learning objective. So we always use the example of when writing a story with a beginning, middle, and end. Well, actually, the learning objective there might be how to construct a narrative, so narrative structure. And once we recognize that's the actual objective here, not to write a story, it's to understand the structure of beginning, middle, and end, whatever it might be. That straight away, great. Well, actually, you can demonstrate your understanding of that through a play, through a comic strip, or through a written story. Either one of those three ways is an effective way for you to show me what you know. And what that then does is it gives some kids opportunities to demonstrate their full understanding. So Dale, you wouldn't necessarily be getting those reports anymore. It would be, yeah, Dale showed us what he knew. He did another wonderful musical number for the class about the Industrial Revolution. And it was brilliant. And it's recognizing it's not necessarily all the time. We've got constraints around kind of standardized assessments that have to be completed in certain ways. And so, yes, sometimes we're going to have a very narrow way that you can demonstrate this understanding. But it's looking for other options during the week, during the year, where I can do a drawing, write something, or have that option. So, and being able to have that opportunity can maybe put enough in my resilience bank to get me through that lesson where you're going to make me write something which I'm not as strong at, or make me draw something which I'm not as strong at. But I know there's other opportunities where I've been able to show you what I know. My peers can see that actually I do have some skills, I do have some abilities. And also for my own academic self concept, I can start to realize actually, I'm not just terrible at school. That actually, school is a place for me and I can achieve here and I can do things here. So it's not putting pressure on yourself to make sure every single time you do this. It's looking for little opportunities where we can put that in place, and just slowly start to nudge away from this kind of monotonous or kind of lack of variety in the way that we ask people to do things.
And it all begins with learning as much about our students as we can, and really getting to understand what motivates them, because people don't ask. And when we did the first book, I went out and did a load of interviews with teenagers about school, and some of them had diagnoses, some of them didn't. But first question was always, tell me about school. Then we go through, what's your best lesson, what was your worst lesson? If you could design a school, what would you do? And da da da. And I'd get to the end of the questionnaire, and then I'd say to them, have you ever told any of your school about this? Because they give really. I'll never forget one young lad. He said, if someone drops a pencil at the back of the classroom, I have to turn around and know what's happened. I have to. There's literally nothing I can do. And the other thing he said was, if someone tells me to stop doing something, I have to do it one more time and then I'll stop. Now, if I'd been his teacher, God help me, if I'd been his teacher, just knowing those two things could have made such an enormous difference to both of our experience. And I said to him, did you ever tell anyone at school this? He said, no, no one ever asked me.
And that's to that sort of market research point. It's, you've got to understand your market. Who am I designing this for? Because otherwise I'm designing to some generic, student, and it's not going to land. It's not going to resonate. It's not going to be relevant or authentic. And it's likely to exclude a large group of kids, regardless of any type of sort of SEN. When, again, in terms of that kind of design, exclusion happens when we design according to our own biases. And because we're all humans, we hold biases, they're cognitive shortcuts to help us process what would otherwise be too much information. But the big bias we all hold as educators when we're designing lessons for our kids is that we are not kids. We're designing from the bias of being an adult, regardless of whether I have any kind of neuronormative bias or whatever it might be. I've got that foundational bias of I'm an adult. So I don't know what it's like to be a child right now in this context right here. Like, I can always try and pretend I'm cool and I know what's going on and just say TikTok every now and again, but it might not be genuine for these children right here, right now. So Claire's point around that, that survey, that questionnaire to children and young people of how I learn best, and that immediately enables me to start to design something that is going to be kind of more relevant and authentic for the children and young people that I've got in my class. But again, that goes back to that fundamental acceptance that these kids are going to be different. They're going to be different to kids I've had before. So my classroom should look different. My lessons should look slightly different. And over time, you'll start to realize some of those kind of constants, but we should be changing things. And actually, even sort of more local than that, the design of our classroom should be different on the last day of the school year than it was on the first day, because it should gradually mold and be shaped around the people who it's meant to be designed for. School is meant to be designed for kids, not designed for us.
I thought you were going to say the word skibbity instead of TikTok, but you went for TikTok. And it's interesting. Go on.
Well, I was just saying, it shows I'm even less cool that I didn't even reach for skibbity.
And interesting, you keep talking about the word design, and I'm on various social medias and looking at various things. And on Reddit, there's a Teaching UK Reddit. And I've seen a number of people talking about, for their subjects in secondary, their trust has designed all their lessons for the year. And the lessons are to be delivered with no deviation, no hesitation, as is, so that all children get the same education. And it's like, well done, you're failing every child, not just in one school. And to me, like I said before, is the teachers I've loved, the teachers I love and work with now, are the ones who bring themselves into the classroom, who have that relationship. So again, Kay, you started something. The first thing is about kind of finding out who your kids are, what makes them and tick or whatever, and kind of tweaking yourself and finding that way you work together. And this whole trust thing is like, no, you're destroying any chance that teacher building a relationship with the children, because they've just got to deliver something they haven't created, which isn't them, to children who are already bored because they're watching you not enjoy it. And it's just screams the worst idea ever. They tried it back in 2007 with the National Numeracy and Literacy Strategies. I think it was when that all came out, with this is how you teach this and this is how you teach that, and all this ordered, and that died. Only thing I am really, really hopeful for is, so we're recording this in mid to late September, and at the moment we know the curriculum and assessment review has been announced, and we've seen the people on it, and to me, I'm really hopeful, very evidence-based, so that's making me really happy. Ofsted have mentioned that inclusion is going to be a criteria in their new framework whenever that comes out. But I was looking at these and I found an article where OCR have written an article saying there are too many exams. On average, English GCSE students do 31.5 hours worth of exams, which is higher than any other country. And OCR, the exam people, said there needs to be less exams. So there are lots of little things which I'm really hoping that this really 100% focus on standardized assessments is going to reduce. We might get coursework back. We might get other ways of assessing. We might get other ways of showing. And they've talked about using tech. I know in Wales, they don't have SATs anymore. They have end of year tests, which are all online, which as you get questions right, the questions gets harder. As you get questions wrong, the questions get easier. And I'm going, yes. So I am quite optimistic. Perhaps I will be completely wrong, but I am very optimistic that actually we can change. And there's lots of talk about reducing that content in the curriculum. So rather than trying to get through 500 topics, or I think my analogy is rather than trying to run through the whole of the Natural History Museum in one day or 4 hours on a school trip, how about we walk slower and see a quarter of it, but actually learn much more? So rather than trying to get through all of that, because it's all really important, where actually no one really gets anything really in depth, reduce it and focus on the depth. We've already learnt with technology that skills are often more important than knowledge, because knowledge I can get through my phone, through a speech, through Alexas, through anything, through so many different things. How do I use that? How am I able to find that out? What do I do with it? They are the more important things. But it's really going to be really interesting going forward.
I think so too. I've got huge hope. I also really hope that instead of looking at better ways to differentiate, some of this universally applied support gets in there at this stage, and that there are people in there who understand the benefits to every single child. If we can make what, again, vital for some, valuable for all, if that can be in there as a core message, because I worry when people talk about inclusion sometimes, because I think with the level of diagnostics going on, there's a danger that it becomes teaching to the little box that they've put someone in rather than teaching to everybody. And the kids that turn up having a bad day and can benefit from it. But I agree. I mean, something's hopefully going to change.
And I think, yeah, I mean, there's just to that point around, diagnosis and that focus on need for diagnosis as opposed to diagnosing needs. It's exactly that. One of the biggest risks with any diagnosis is loss of meaning. So what does it mean for this individual at this context, at this point in their life, with their hopes and dreams and their ambitions? What does it mean? And therefore, how do we design something that's meaningful for this person rather than, oh, you're dyslexic. It's two of these, one of these, and one of those. That's your kind of package, instead of recognizing that you too, even though you're dyslexic, are going to be very different from that other dyslexic person. And therefore, there might be something else that might be useful for you or relevant to you. And I just think that we're reaching that point where it's going to get harder and harder to balance in terms of rhetoric this idea of acceptance of neurodiversity and then to try and talk about anything standardized. Because if we accept the variability, then we can't standardize something because there's no standard upon which to standardize it. It goes back to then this expectation that there is this normal person and they are then the standard. And anybody that deviates from that is disordered, deficient, or dysfunctional, rather than recognizing actually that's another person with a unique set of attributes. And rather than taking those unique attributes, repackaging them and handing them back to that person as a list of inadequacies and failures, we instead say, actually, those are your unique attributes, and everyone has these unique attributes and ways of doing things. And we're going to kind of accommodate all of that because we have a flexible system and we've got options. And it's not as simple as just throwing a whole bunch of options out there. It's about knowing your students and knowing what options are relevant for them, and also that they understand the value of those options. So it's not just saying, hey, you can access this text either through hard copy, audiobook, or e-reader. It's making clear to the children, these are the benefits of accessing the text through audiobook. These are the cons of doing that. These are the benefits of accessing it on an e-reader. These are the cons of that. And then I can start to make an informed choice. And that process of starting to understand how I learn best and starting to understand, which ways of accessing this learning is best for me is just as valuable as the end product that I create to demonstrate my micro level learning in this situation. And actually, that's what we're trying to achieve. The curriculum is just a vehicle to deliver people that have got to deliver children, young people that are confident in themselves, what they can do, and how they learn best and manage information best. So again, that process of asking kids how you learn best is valuable as a product for me as an educator, because now I know, okay, these are my kids. I can work out what's particularly relevant for them and design an environment that works for them. But also it's super useful for the children, because so often, like, it would be really, I think a lot of kids struggle to answer that question when you ask them, how do you learn best? Because none of them know that there's another way you can learn. Like, oh, so you mean I don't just have to come in here, sit still and stare at that screen and that person taught, there's another way I can do this? And it's letting people have those opportunities to then learn about themselves.
I think with these kind of the standardized way of doing things, every single person is on a really short leash. You can't deviate that far, which means you can't learn what works for you because you only get that short. You have to learn this way. Whereas I'm hoping things like coursework, you can fail. You can do it the way that works for you. You can spend however much time, get it wrong, leave it to the last minute, rush it and go, that didn't work. Do it again a different way the next time. I'm also hoping, and again, going back to you, Claire, you said relevance. And that's always been a big thing for me. If I'm interested in something, I will learn faster than anyone. I am there. I will just hyper focus and I'm learning. You want me to learn about the Industrial Revolution? I will never learn about the Industrial Revolution. Why? Now, if you say to me, actually, the real reason you're learning about Industrial Revolution is nothing about the Industrial Revolution, but actually how it impacted people and how that mirrors the today's science, and you actually give me a bit more context, then I'm there. But also, and again, another thing I'm hoping is, why are we still doing the Victorian subjects in the way we are? Wales have moved away from it. Scotland moved away from it. Just before Labour lost, however many years ago that was, lost count, 2010 or so, they were just trying to bring in a brand new curriculum. And it was more in primary. It was closer to the early years. There were 7 areas like understanding the world as one big combined area and things like that. And you're going, that makes more sense to me. I don't do siloed stuff at work. I do everything in one go. I do projects. So moving to maybe a different structure of how we teach so we can do these things, we see these connections, that relevance comes in, that hopefully that interest comes in. Also giving, this is a bit where I hope AI can help. Part of the reason every school does the Industrial Revolution is so we can standardize across the whole school or country what it is we're looking for, that level of knowledge and how you demonstrate it, and we can moderate across the whole country and be happy. Surely we're getting to that point where AI could do that for us. We could have a block of text, we can give it to AI, we give it the criteria and say, based on this criteria, how well has it met it? And then I could do a whole project on grasshoppers. Claire could do one on knitting. And Jamie can do something on whatever he wants. But can he demonstrate that knowledge in the same way using that? We're at that point now. We've got the technology. We should be able to start doing this.
And I think it goes back to, again, that clarity over what's the learning objective. Because if I recognize that, then I can realize there's different ways of expressing that. So, and I know what I'm looking for. So in this bit of interpretive dance, I'm looking for this. In this, I'm looking for this. I'm still looking for those same fundamental kind of elements, and that'll allow me to kind of look across those different areas in different kind of ways of expressing that. And it gives more opportunities for that engagement. We know that kids are disengaged from school, and they're voting with their feet. And again, if it was a choice, it's not engaging.
It's not. It is. And that's the thing. I think with schools, there are teachers who are unhappy and they move jobs, they leave teaching. Students do not have the option. They have very limited option. The only way they can vote is with their behaviour and their feet.
Absolutely. I have a dream that by the end of year 6, children will know how they take written information in. So they've learnt the option between listening, reading, and listening and reading at the same time. They have some idea about how they like to present information. They have an idea of whether they work best on their own in maths or whether they like to work in a small group, whether they like to be standing up or whether they like to be sitting on a beanbag with headphones and a laptop in front of them. And that a lot of that gets done towards the end of Key Stage 2, so that by the time they hit Key Stage 3, there's a kind of agreed, or that there's a kind of shared understanding between the kids, the teachers, everybody, and the parents. Parents are struggling with homework in a way that I haven't seen for a really long time. And again, I think it's this compliance that the kids really struggle with in school, sort of bleeding into home time. And I think for lots of the young people I work with, it's really hard for them to bring their school self into the home. And I think that anything we can do to just bring more agency from home into school's got to be a good thing. So yeah, teaching kids to learn how they learn best, that's got to be it. And we've got to put more of that in place by the end of primary.
And there is a phrase for teaching someone how to learn, which is hoitagogy.
That's a cool word.
Which I did not know.
No, nor did I.
I had to look it up, and it was, teaching someone how to learn. So not teaching them a subject, but actually, if you teach them to learn, it's like if you teach someone if you give someone a fish, they can eat for a day. If you teach someone to fish, they will. It's that rather than teaching them one thing, teach them how to learn anything.
Absolutely. And then we can go off and do projects on knitting and grasshoppers and all of that, and it doesn't matter, or skateboarding or whatever it is. Yeah, go on.
And I think that fish analogy is another one in terms of these kind of universal approaches, because what we've unintentionally done is we've gone back to the point of unity and diversity. We focus so much on the extent that certain children are different from other children, and we're therefore trying to kind of create all of these sort of different lessons for children, young people, that we've sort of then lost sight of those kind of unifying factors or those kind of universal aspects. So back to that point of knowing how I learn best, understanding kind of myself best, and actually that's the kind of focus that we should be looking at, and trying to cut through some of that. Too much of a focus on that difference.
And if we teach 3 children how to fish, what you'll find is one person is really good at getting that hook and the float and setting it all up right. And someone else is amazing with the net. And as you have those 3 people, they will work out how the 3 of them work and do that well together. But we're not teaching them to fish. We're not giving them opportunity to work out how they work together, which probably, if we go back to our previous podcast around sensory uncertainty, we're not giving them the opportunities in those teenage years to really kind of spend time in a semi-safe, controlled environment, working out how you will work together. We're not giving them, they have the unstructured time where you're all together, but actually, is there much project work going on? Are they failing in year 7, slowly working out in year 8, getting better in year 9, hopefully almost there in year 10? We're not giving those opportunities.
And just, I lost track of my fish there, but I was, in terms of the the fish. It's the same with our educators and with educational practitioners in terms of being given a fish or being taught how to fish or being given a net. This focus on difference and these discrete different categories that we put children in inevitably ends up in this situation where we then give teachers a whole bunch of different fish. Here's your autism fish, here's your ADHD fish, here's your dyslexia fish. But what I haven't got is that understanding of, what are the kind of fundamentals here? Actually, how do I? So it means, when I've eaten that fish or whether this strategy fails, I've got nothing to fall back on. I've got nothing left. Whereas if I'm in that fundamental bit of just understanding this person as another person and understand some of those kind of universal areas of difficulty that we all share, so in particular kind of uncertainty, then I'm much more empowered to adapt and tweak and change what I'm doing to better meet the kind of context in which I'm working. So that would be this particular class of kids or this particular situation. I think a lot of support, particularly in the world of SEN, has focused too much on just handing out those fish. And part of that is because you've got really time pressured and stressed teachers who are essentially, I'm not sure if I'm keeping this metaphor going, but who are essentially there starving and just need a fish because, I'm about to kind of die. So please don't go and tell me how to catch it. I'm dying here. Just give me a fish. But and so the issue there is there has to be a recognition that to pivot to more universal ways of doing things and changing our practice, there will be a front loading of additional workload. But over time, that'll reduce because all that differentiation that I'm having to do will start to disappear. And, you know, we, so you'll have less and less differentiation that you're needing to do. And actually, you'll have less and less children with a special educational need because you'll have fewer and fewer children who will require something different from or additional to that which is given to everybody else.
And I'm going to really hang on to this fish analogy, literally by probably why the threads are getting very thin now. But you had that autistic child, I'm going to call it the autistic fish, but it's a fish for autistic children. And they're like, but I don't want that one. They're like, no, you're autistic. This is the autistic
Yes.
fish. This is your fish. You have to like it. This is the only one we've got for you. And they're like, but actually the dyslexic fish works better for me. No,
Yeah.
You get into that siloing, and actually a slightly bigger fish works for more people.
Yeah. And it's also disempowering for that practitioner because suddenly I'm left there and I got nothing. It's why we talk a lot around the theoretical understanding of, how we think fundamental difficulties we all experience because practice without theory is really brittle. It's got a kind of illusory strength. We think it's solid and works, but actually then when it comes up against a situation where it doesn't work, it fails spectacularly. It shatters. And you're suddenly left there and like, okay, I've got nothing. The autistic fish didn't work. So I've got nothing left now other than I've just got to remove this child because now I've got uncertainty. What do I do? I don't have knowledge. So what do I reach for? Control, agency. I'm going to make this child somebody else's responsibility. I'm going to hand them off to a TA, or I'm going to get them out of my class, or I'm just going to load or kind of give myself the psychological insulation that I might not be meeting this child's needs by reinforcing that idea that the reason they're struggling is because there's something different and wrong with them, as opposed to actually something in this environment there. Because, to the point we made earlier about that sort of resentment about the additional workload, because of the system we have at the moment, which is this piecemeal adoption of isolated interventions, there's another thing there. Everybody goes into teaching. Well, most folks go into teaching because they care about kids and want kids to be happy and comfortable. And if I'm sitting there and I'm really struggling to support this child because I'm hamstrung by this standardized way I have to do something, or I haven't been given the agency or haven't been given the trust that I know my kids best and what they need, then I've got the emotional distress of feeling like I'm failing this child. And that's going to lead to an emotional burnout And in that situation, because I'm a human, I'm going to try and psychologically insulate myself from the impact of that. And that can then serve to reinforce this idea of a focus on difference. So again, I'm going to go along with that narrative of, oh, it's okay. This child could never access my class because they have this disorder, deficit, dysfunction. It reinforces that idea of a normal and abnormal. And we kind of push into that. And we have that focus on need for diagnosis, not because anybody's a bad person, but what you've got is a kind of normal reaction to the psychological distress of feeling like I'm not able to support this child. And that's again can perpetuate this this fractured nature of support that we currently have.
And I think what's so interesting is that requests to our team have gone from, can you come and do autism training? Or can you come and tell us about ADHD? To, can you just help me with this class? Can you help me with the behaviors that I'm seeing in this class that I'm not understanding or that aren't fitting with the way that I thought I was supposed to teach? And we're now working with a bunch of schools on really long-term projects, looking at systemic change rather than one inset and then off you go, never to be seen again. I mean, we know what happens. Those of us who've worked in schools, it's all about that for that first term. By the end of the summer, it's kind of faded. And that's super exciting.
So we're working on handing out a bunch of nets instead of a bunch of fish.
That's the thing is, on that 1 day inset, on that training session the Senko does, she is telling you what fish you need for those autistic children. And it's like, it is the fish. So you go away going, I've got the fish. I know what fish to give out. When it doesn't work, you're like, I've been sold a bad fish.
Yeah.
Right, enough fish. I'm hoping that with some of the stuff they talk about in the curriculum and assessment review and some of the stuff Ofsted are talking about is the curriculum is going to be slimmed down slightly. So there is that time to build relationships. Moving away from everything being tested means we can't just do tested. So I'm hoping there's lots of little changes which make the changes that you're talking about, and a lot of the guests have talked about on the podcast, actually puts more in reach within that school.
Yeah, and I think a really important bit of that around the tests and everything else is hopefully what will happen naturally as a result of that is as well the lowering of the stakes.
Yeah.
At the moment, they're going to drop a GCSE grade, so suddenly every single day is high stakes. You have to get there. You have to do, for a teacher, you have to get through this content. And if you don't deliver this, you'll fall behind here, and then your class, high stakes. And the nobody really learns effectively in a high stakes environment. In a high stakes environment, you're unlikely to take a risk. You're usually going to fall back on what you know. And to learn, you need to embrace uncertainty and you need to take a risk. Uncertainty is the only way we learn, by having our current perceptions and expectations challenged. And then we kind of update those models that we hold. In a high stakes environment, I'm not going to take a risk, and I'm less likely, therefore, to try something new, to do a different way of answering this question, to try a different question, to try and do it in a different way. So I think it's really important that we try to lower the stakes as much as possible, even to things that are meant to be low stakes opportunities to practice a high stakes task. So like mock exams, for example, even they are really high stakes. If you don't get good mocks, then you don't get good predictions, and you don't get good offers. There's no opportunities for that. And the most perfect kind of situation where we engage in high stakes activities in a low stakes environment is through play. And so it's about, where is the joy and fun and playfulness in teaching? Where's that gone? And we often say, when was the last time you had fun teaching a lesson? Because if it wasn't the last lesson we taught, then chances are folks weren't necessarily learning as much as they could have done, because it might have been perceived as a slightly higher stakes environment. So I'm not going to take that risk.
That's definitely really interesting to reflect on is, did you enjoy today's teaching or yesterday's teaching? Did you enjoy giving those lessons? And that's a really interesting, because if you're not enjoying it, your children will kind of feed off that. Consciously or subconsciously, you're on a downward spiral.
Absolutely. And so I think to facilitate that, there needs to be a devolving of trust across all levels. So central government needs to give more trust to local authorities around their schools and their catchment areas. Local authorities need to give more trust to individual schools to know their cohort, to know their children, to know what to focus on. And then within individual schools, teachers need to be given more trust that they know their specific class best, and therefore they can adapt and tweak and deliver their content in a way that works best for that cohort, rather than, and that way again, I think allows for more of that relevant and flexible support to be put in place for children, young people, and ultimately then to make things more fun and more engaging.
Well, thank you for coming on the show today, Claire and Jamie. You've given me some links to share, as always, and they're in the show notes, as always. Wherever you find the podcast, in the show notes, you'll find all of the links, as well as their contact details. Please follow us on all the social medias. Generally, if you just search for the Sendcast, you'll find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and even TikTok. And if you listen to us with Apple iTunes or Apple Podcasts, please leave us a review and let others know what you think. And before we go, I'm just going to remind you about the Sendcast sessions. This is our online video CPD. It's on the same website as the podcast. And if you haven't accessed a Sendcast session, these are video CPD sessions, often with the same great guests as on the podcast. And we release 20 sessions a year. 9 of these are live sessions that you can join and be part of the Q&A throughout the year. And we also have 2 free send briefings, which are completely free, just to keep you up to date with what's going on. The sessions, the paid sessions anyway, are £10 per school, and you can watch live on the day, or you can watch later on. When you buy a session, this is yours forever. And it's a really great way to get CPD around SEND to all staff. So if you're going to the test show, the Senko goes, what about everyone else? And the Sendcast sessions is a great way to achieve that. And don't forget, for even better value, you can subscribe to Sendcast sessions for £175 a year and access all of our CPD sessions that we have available now and in the future. So thank you for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Sendcast. It is goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
We did certainty there. I told them the order. It was smooth. It proves a point. Bye, everyone.